So today we're starting a new chapter in the textbook. A new subject is called Safety of Flight. There's actually 4 topics. You ought to actually, it does say that it's 4A. So there'll be 4A, B, C, A, B, C, D. There's 4 topics out of chapter 4. Just as a reminder, if you're not here today, then the draft essay for the private pilot essay, the draft essay form is due on, what day? Thursday. Yeah, tomorrow, Thursday. At what time? 1:20. Okay. Anybody have any questions about how to do that draft? Question, Brian. I have an extra copy. Do you have $1? You'll have to see me. Oh, wait. Here we are. I only have one extra. See me at break, and I'll print out some more. Oh, wait. He stood up and ran up here and got one. Anybody else need a blank essay? Question, go ahead. This is for private. All you have to know, you turn in this piece of paper. You turn in this piece of paper, which is identical in the methodology to fill it out, is identical to the 3 essays we did in aviation history, unless you're Jonathan. So I'm sure you'll get a horrendously poor grade on it because you haven't practiced it before. So you ought to have in front of you, were there any spares here there? You ought to have in front of you a place to take notes. So does anybody remember, has anybody gotten less than a 100% on a quiz in private pilot ground school? 1 or 2 people? Okay, great. What do you think is the primary reason why you got less than 100%? What about your notes? Poor notes. When you say poor notes, what do you mean? Not enough. Yeah, I would have said you haven't written enough things down. Hopefully you don't write it so bad handwriting you can't read your own handwriting. But that has happened to me too. I've been in too much of a hurry. So just because it's not written down on that piece of paper you have in front of you doesn't mean that you don't need to write it down. So I'm going to practice today reminding you what things need to get written down so you can start getting into a better habit pattern of what needs to get written down. So if you were writing this all down, I'd say write down 04A, safety of flight. All right, the first thing we're talking about is collision avoidance. What is collision avoidance? That's where you keep one aircraft from hitting another aircraft, whether it's in the ground or on the airport. Most of the time, don't get me wrong, you need to make sure you don't hit airplanes when you're taxiing around on the ground, but that's usually a little bit easier than it is to avoid airplanes in flight. The biggest time on the ground when you worry about avoidance is making sure that you don't cross a runway unless the ground controller has given you permission. So you're writing that down right now. The most likely time you're going to have an aircraft collision on the ground at an airport is when somebody taxis onto the runway without permission. They do it by accident, like they do it on purpose. But they do, and they're trying to get to the right place and they're into the runway. Airport with a tower, and you're taking off or landing, it may be against the rules for those other airplanes to accidentally tax the runway, and there's airport markers that show you where the runways are, but every now and then it happens, and this is a really big force, and I mean the FAA. Who did the report on the Canary Islands 747 crashes? Must have been Mr. Cardoso. Maybe he did it. 2 747s hit each other on the ground. Now there was fog, but one of the crew taxiing one of the 747s got confused, and they taxied out onto the runway when they weren't supposed to. 47 was landing or taking off, I can't remember, and they didn't see him until it was too late. So it's called runway incursion. So you can write that down, runway incursion. And you're going, Mr. Johnson, I don't know how to spell incursion. And I go, okay, I can help you spell incursion here. A runway incursion is when someone accidentally taxis onto the runway. It may not cause an accident, But if somebody accidentally taxis onto the runway when they're not supposed to, that's called a runway incursion. Jonathan? Do you get fined? Well, maybe. It depends on what the situation is. This is what will happen. This is what needs to happen. If you accidentally get onto the runway, you need to be getting off of the runway as fast as you can while you're calling the air traffic controller up and say, I accidentally just taxied onto runway 29 or left and I'm turning around right now and getting off of it. Because they're going to notice. So at least if you're proactive, get your butt out of there, because somebody could be taking off and landing. And I hate it when 747s land on top of me, but that's just me. Maybe that doesn't bother you. Even other little airplanes hitting me at 100 miles an hour. Remember, little airplanes don't have, we have seat belts and some shoulder harnesses, but we don't have airbags. And they're not designed to withstand crashes. You know how many times they take airplanes and crash them into brick walls, like the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration does with cars every year? Oh, wait, they don't do that with airplanes. Airplanes aren't designed to crash. Cars are designed to crash. But that's a whole other topic. All right. Then what the controller is going to do is they're going to say, call me after you've parked your airplane. Call the tower. Here's the phone number. And they're going to call you, and they're going to either say, you were a bad pilot. Don't ever do that again. Goodbye. Or they're going to say, you were a bad pilot, and I need your name, your phone number, your address, because I got the end number of your airplane, and the FAA is going to come talk to you. So if you don't give me your phone number and address, they're still going to come get you. And then the FAA will call you that day or later that day, and they say, we have to come talk to you. And then they will question you and interrogate you and waterboard you. I mean, they won't waterboard you, but they will ask you a lot of questions. And then the FAA employee will start thinking about what they want to do about it. Question? Have the FAA's talked to me lots of times. Oh, that's... No, actually, every time I have spoken to the FAA, it's been one of two reasons. Either I have gone to the FAA office to talk to the FAA people about something, been working at an aviation facility, and it's one of their scheduled or unscheduled visits to come inspect you. The FAA can do a thing called a ramp check, so why don't you write this down? Let's write down ramp check. R-A-M-P-C-H-E-C-K, ramp check. A ramp check is where the FAA walks up to you while you're getting ready to go fly. Actually, usually they come after you right after you landed, and then they want to see if you got your pilot certificate and medical certificate, work in the airplane is correct, and we're not going to go over all those details. And they don't have to have probable cause. It's not like a police officer can't stop you unless you have a tail light out or something like that. It's not like that. The FAA gets to just walk up to you and say, oh, you just left, huh? Okay, I want to see you. And don't write things, but they're literally, it's like getting a traffic stop where the cop asks for your driver's license, insurance, and registration, and then they look inside your car and see if you're doing something illegal in there. Okay, the cops aren't supposed to be able to stop you unless they have a probable cause, like your light is burned out. Now they can lean over and look at the car. Okay, but the FAA doesn't need probable cause. Inspectors are reasonable people. Underline the word most. In fact, the vast majority. But they actually have a list of what they're going to look for. But we're not going to that. I've never been ramp checked. It's just, I've never been in the right place for a long time. No, the feds have never caught me doing anything I wasn't supposed to do. I mean, the government officials. Yeah, in the industry, we call them the feds. Question, Jonathan? What about the FAA? The FAA, I've never been drug tested by the FAA, but I worked for a company for 8 years, and pre-employment drug testing, and we had random drug testing the entire time you were an employee, whether you're a flight instructor, a student, or any employee, including the janitor. We had random, it was drug and alcohol testing, and then it was random once a quarter, every 3 months. We had a separate company randomly select employees, and you had to go pee that day, and if you didn't go pee, we treated you as if you tested positive. Question? It was random. Once you got as an employee or a student it's a big flight school. Between all the students and all the employees, we probably had 250, 280 employees if you count the part-time people. And I mean, if your number didn't come up, you didn't get tested, but it was random. So we tested between we probably tested 10 people every quarter. I don't recall. I wasn't in charge of that. I just went in and I said, hey man, when's the next random P test? I can't tell you. Well, here's $100. Can you tell me now? Oh yeah, it's the day after tomorrow. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. That's probably one thing that you ought to think about if you want to become an aviator of any kind. I don't think I said this at the beginning of this semester. Marijuana, there are methods by which in the state of California, the police won't arrest you if you possess it or use it. Correct? Okay, now what those details are, so don't listen to anything what I say, how legal it is. But that is still considered a class something or other 1 or 2 narcotic by the federal government. It's right up there with methamphetamines as far as the federal government is concerned, and so it is with the FAA. If you have an act, probably what they could do if the FAA employee shows up, they could ask for a drug test right then. And I don't know the legal particulars about whether they can force you or not, or whether you can say no or not. Of course, it won't look good if you say no. But if you do have an accident, for sure, if you bang up an airplane, it is mandatory that you have to have a drug and alcohol test. And if they find, traces of marijuana in there, you just violated a federal law, and you could be convicted of a felony under federal law, and they will take your pilot they can if they want, take all your FAA certificates away. So like a ground instructor certificate and a remote pilot certificate and a pilot certificate and a mechanic certificate, and one of these days I'll renew my flight instructor. They could take them all away. And here's what's interesting: drug-related offenses, they can, if they want, they can take your certificates away for the rest of your life, and you can never get them back. It's not like they revoke it, and then a year later or two, you can go take the check rides again and get it back. For drug-related offenses, they got a special line in the FAA regulations that they can take it away. So, effectively, it means if you want to drink alcohol and abuse it and show up under the influence, you take somebody else's prescription medications that aren't yours, or you want to take your own prescription medications and go flying, or you want to take over-the-counter medications that you're not supposed to take when you go fly, or if you want to take really illegal drugs, or a mechanic or an air traffic controller, you can be the airport landscaper and the airport restaurant dishwasher, because they don't hold FAA certificates and the FAA doesn't rank. If you're in a state where marijuana is different than federal, then that's between you and the state, and I'm not going to get into those particulars. And I'm not trying to tell you it's such a terrible life. That's the way I live. The rule is you can't drink alcohol within 8 hours of flying. You can't be under the influence of alcohol when you go flying, and you can't have more than a blood alcohol level of 0.04 when you go flying. In California, I think in most states 0.08 is more than 0.08%. But you could be under the influence of alcohol by having. So you have to decide: do I like aviation enough that I'm going to separate alcohol use versus my operating as an aviator? If the answer is yes, then awesome, that's a way to go. And if you can't separate it, then maybe you need to think about doing something else. Okay, so ramp check. In any case, so let's say the FAA comes out that next day. They're going to want to look at the of your runway incursion. They're going to come and ask you a lot of questions. They're going to get the paperwork, the registration certificate, a bunch of stuff like that. They're going to want to see your pilot certificate. They're going to want to look at your logbook to see if you've had recency of experience with landing. You fly with a flight instructor within the last 2 years. That's called a flight review. Is your medical? Do you have a current medical? And they're going to ask you a lot of questions about what happened. And then they're going to decide. They're going to recommend to their supervisor to you. And it could just be, don't ever do that again. Or it could be office and they write you a letter that says, don't ever do that again. It could be they go back to their office and they say, we're going to suspend your certificate for 30 days, or 60 days, or 90 days, or 6 months, or a year. Or they could revoke it, take it away, but usually revocations, if it's not drug related, a year later you can go take the check ride. You don't have to take the written, but you got to go take the check ride again. And they could also impose fines. And if you don't like it, you can hire an attorney and sue and appeal it to the National Transportation Safety Board. So it really depends. If I'm trying to think of a reason why you could taxi onto a runway and they wouldn't at least write you a letter. I can't think that they wouldn't at least write you a letter. Oh, it's marked really well. If you taxi onto a runway, it's almost for sure it's your fault, unless the air traffic control you could taxi onto the runway. And just so you know, they record all air traffic control radio frequencies. They're all recorded. So if you say, well, air traffic controller gave me clearance to cross that runway, electronic now, they're probably not on tapes like cassette tapes anymore. But they're going to pull the recordings up and listen. If the air traffic controller gave you permission to cross that runway, then you're good. And they're going to go after that air traffic controller and say, shame on you. And I don't know what they do to air traffic controllers. But anybody ever seen white letters when driving a car? These aren't cars. They're red. Yeah. Reedley International Airport. There's no tower. You transmit on the radio. So you brought up a good point. So what do you do if you're in an airport without a tower? How do you get onto the runway and be legal, moral, and more importantly, safe? So what you generally do is after you get the engine started, you turn. There's a frequency labeled for that airport. It's called CTAF, CTAF. So you can write down CTAF right now. And CTAF stands for 4 words. Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. I'll write that up here. Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. Let's see, I know I can write here somewhere. So CTAF, I'm just... Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. Oops. But CTAF is the normal abbreviation. There's a CTAF frequency listed for airports that don't have towers. And this is the frequency that everybody that's taken off and landing at this airport needs to be listening to. Do you legally have to use this frequency? The answer is no. What if you have an old airplane that doesn't have radios in it? You can take off and land at a non-towered airport all you want. You can fly around the traffic pattern and practice. So that's the good news. Most pilots have radios, and most pilots talk on the radio to tell other airplanes where they are. The downside is it's not mandatory. You can even have an airplane with radios. You can just reach up there and turn the radio off if you want. But most pilots don't do that. So really the way it boils down to, and I'm glad you asked that question, is the way to avoid hitting other airplanes at uncontrolled airports, the ones that don't have towers, it's called see and avoid. You look out the window for other airplanes. You listen on the radio. You tell other people on the radio where you are, but you make an assumption that there's people flying around the airport that aren't using the radio. You make that assumption. So what you'll do is, if you were going to take off, as soon as you get the engine started, you turn all the radios on, you turn it to the CTAF frequency at Reedley, it's 122.7, and you say, and you don't have to write this down, you say, Reedley, that's the name of the airport, traffic. So that's who you're talking to. I'm talking to airplanes flying around Reedley. Then you give your call sign, the registration number on the side of the airplane. 791, taxiing for takeoff, departing to the north or departing to the south, or something like that. So anybody that's flying around, let's say they're 5 miles out there coming in, they're going to go, aha, there's an airplane on the ground, and they're going to take off pretty soon, so I'm going to start paying attention. And I wasn't. So if you've already looked at the wind, which way the wind is blowing, and you know which runway you're going to take off, you can even say, I'm going to take runway 15 and go to the north or something like that. And then just before takeoff, you would say, Reedley traffic, Cessna 790-122, is departing, or is taking off runway 15, and I'm heading for the east. And then the last thing at the end, you say, Reedley traffic. So at the beginning and at the end, you say the name of the airport. So somebody didn't catch it at the beginning, and they're listening, and then they hear it. Because 122, there's only so many frequencies. You get up to 3,000 feet around here, and there's probably 10 airports with 122.7 that I could pick up airplanes on that frequency. So that's why you got to say your name of the airport. But when you take flying lessons, your instructor's going to pound that into you quite a bit. So here is a fighter jet with a heads-up display. It's flying on a low-level route. It's a military training route, which we'll end up looking at on a chart and see where these are. But it's flying, I don't know, it looks like 500 or 800 feet off the ground. Oh, wait, what was that? So here, let's rewind it. And rewind it again. I can't even hit it fast enough. So let's just pretend the jet's going 500 miles an hour, and I couldn't tell what airplane that was, but it was probably going 150 or 200 miles an hour. It wasn't a little trainer airplane. Neither one of these two airplanes saw the other one until of course, as soon as after that, the pilot's going, ah! Question, Brian. Well, if you have 20/20 vision and you're not looking to the left and the airplane's coming from the left, you still don't see it. You're the pilot of this military airplane. You're following your checklist. You're looking at the information on the HUD. You're looking straight ahead because that's where most of the airplanes are because you're going so fast. Little tiny airplanes that low. Most of them are dead or in front of you, plus or minus 20 or 30 degrees either side of straight ahead. And you're thinking about when's the next time you turn, and you're thinking, I don't know. I don't think fighter jet pilots eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in flight. That's one good reason to be on a bomber. It's because when I was a navigator, I actually got a table. I could set up my lunch, set up my Mountain Dew, and sometimes I had a ham sandwich. In any case, it's difficult. And besides, how many seconds was that airplane visible anyway? Not very many. I mean, granted, we only get to see a portion of it, but that airplane might have only been visible for a few seconds, and you might have been looking out the right window. So, I just, I think it's kind of fun to look at when people almost die. When you laugh and I say that, it makes you think it's also fun. So let's see. So here, I'm going to stop. So that on some kind of videos, that black line's actually the propeller. I don't know enough about video cameras and optics and junk like that to know why it looks like that. But what I want you to notice is this dot right over here on the far left side, about in the middle. I want you to watch that dot on the far left side on the middle. Jonathan? Yeah, go for it. Thanks. Now, this is in an old Piper airplane I recognize because there's a hinge on the cowling here on the left. So this airplane's probably doing 100, 120 knots. And what I want you to notice is the dot's not moving that much. It's getting bigger, but you'll notice it's right up above this left corner of the cowling. Here, I'm going to go back a few seconds. And you notice, and let's see if we can catch that dot. Okay. So this dot is not moving fast. It's moving really, really slow. And the closer it gets, the less it moves. It gets bigger, but the closer it gets, it's moving from the left to the right slower and slower and slower. So in flight, you might not even notice it. That's the problem. It's not, there it is. Now it's hardly moving at all. It just gets bigger. So what's interesting about avoiding other aircraft is that the ones that are going to hit you, if they're perfectly aligned to hit you, you look out there and it looks like they're not moving. They may get slowly bigger, but it fits on a collision course. If they're looking at you and they're going to look at you, you may slowly get bigger as you get closer, but you're not moving left, you're not moving right, you're not moving up, you're not moving down. So fortunately, this airplane was moving across the windscreen. So yay, that's good, because that means they probably weren't. But that's an inherent problem. You can't just look up there and wait to see something moving. So you still even have to look for things that don't look like they're moving. So just for fun, how close was this person? Yeah. I don't know, that's 50, 75 feet above the airplane. Yeah, that's 50 or 75 feet. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. All right, so let's talk about who's responsible to make sure that you don't hit somebody else. Well, it's not just one little tiny rule. Air traffic control is only responsible to keep IFR aircraft separated from other IFR aircraft. So you can write that down and I'll tell you what that means. Air traffic control is only responsible for keeping IFR aircraft separated from other IFR aircraft. You're going, what is an IFR aircraft? Well, you generally have to have an instrument rating to fly IFR. There's an old saying, I'll write it down, but it's called IFR roads, but that's not what it is. Brian, question? Well, there's if you're flying next to another airplane, if you're doing it deliberately in formation, there's no minimum amount. There's actually no minimum amount to avoid another airplane, even if they don't know you're there. But I would suggest that at some point you're so close you're not safe, and then the FAA will bust you for careless and reckless. So if it's another airplane and they don't know you're there, I'd say at least a quarter of a mile or at least 500 feet in altitude. But it depends on the situation, I think. If they know you're there, it's a lot different story. If they know you're there, then as long as you don't hit each other, there's no minimum amount. And if you're flying in formation, I highly recommend that you never fly in formation unless you receive instruction from someone who knows how to do formation flying. There's no regulation that says you have to get instruction before you fly in formation, but it's easy to have a mid-air collision and everyone in both airplanes die. So I recommend that you do that. It's like, okay, I'm used to driving around my parents' 67 Chevy Impala. And it's a lowrider, so it only goes about 70 miles an hour because I can't lift it up high enough to go faster. Don't tell me don't drive it faster than 67. So what do? I go to the Phoenix International Raceway and I rent a Maserati that goes 200 miles an hour. I'm going to get in that car and drive it at 200 miles an hour on a racetrack, but I don't take any lessons from a race car driver. Am I going to crash within the next few turns around the race? Probably I'm going to crash. Okay, same thing with formation flying. It's not that it wasn't legal, it's just that it's really not safe. All right, so I'm going to get to, you don't have to write this down because we're going to cover IFR here shortly, but IFR means that you have an instrument rating. You don't have to write this down yet. IFR means you have an instrument rating and you can and do fly through the clouds. And if you do that, a flight plan with the air traffic control system, and it says where you're going to take, when you're going to take off, where you're going to fly. If you're at an airport like Reedley, as soon as you take off, you call air traffic control. If you're at Fresno, where there's a tower, you're already talking to them. You're talking to air traffic control the entire time, and they have you on radar pretty much all the time. And they see two blips, and they either make you climb to different altitudes, or they make you fly far away from each other, and they'll keep you separated from the other airplanes. An instrument flight plan, an IFR flight plan. But we're talking about private pilot flying here. We don't have instrument ratings. We just have private pilot certificates. We can't fly in the clouds. We can't fly an IFR flight plan. We're going to be VFR. I'll tell you about VFR here pretty shortly. VFR stands for Visual Flight Rules. And that means effectively two things. I can look out the window and make sure I don't hit other airplanes. And number two, I can look out the window and make sure I don't hit any terrain. And three, I don't have to talk to hardly anybody. If I don't go to a towered airport, I don't have to even have a radio in my airplane. But now I'm responsible. So, air traffic control is only responsible for separating IFR aircraft from other IFR aircraft. That's what they're responsible for. The pilot in command is responsible for separation from all other VFR traffic. And that's whether you're IFR or VFR. So if you're on an IFR flight plan and the weather is good, air traffic control only has to keep you separated from the IFR traffic. So you still have to look out the window and make sure you don't hit anybody. If you're flying VFR, because you're a private pilot and the weather is good, you are also responsible for keeping yourself separated from everyone out there. So the easy way to answer this question, the pilot commander is responsible for what? if for keeping separated from all VFR traffic. So effectively, if you're a private pilot, you got to be looking out the window a lot. You got to look out the window a lot. Now, there's one exception that I thought of. It wasn't even in the textbook. If you fly in a Class airspace, Class B airspace, you can write that down. The exception is Class B, and it's capital B in Bravo. Class B airspace into airspace across different places that have a lot of air traffic control going on because there's a lot of airplanes flying in and out of, and there are levels of how complex and what kind of equipment and how busy it is. So there's the biggest airports like Los Angeles International, San Francisco International. Those are Class B airspace airports, and above them is airspace that nobody can fly into it. And you don't have to write this down, but Class B airspace, nobody can fly into it unless they have at least a private pilot certificate and unless they have certain equipment on board and they get clearance and permission to go into the airspace beforehand. We're going to talk about Class B airspace. Right now I'm happy if you just write down. The exception is Class B airspace. Since airspace is having certain equipment and everybody in Class B airspace is being talking to air traffic control, even the VFR pilots, even you as a private pilot, they are primarily responsible for keeping separation from all the airplanes. And you don't have to write this down, but now all you have to do is be a pilot. It's just staying out of the clouds. Conditions, which we'll get to on the next slide, there's a certain distance you have to stay away from the clouds because you need to be able to see that IFR airplane pop out and then miss them. Or that IFR airplane has to pop out of the clouds and be able to see you. That airplane has to stay away from the cloud. But in Class B airspace, everybody's on radar. Everybody's talking air traffic control. And so they're making sure that nobody hits nobody. They're making sure that no one hits anyone. Or they're making sure that no one hits no one. That everyone hits everyone. No, that last one's not right. It's not everyone hits everyone. Of all those answers, that was the worst one. Okay, so I want to talk about visual flight rules at the moment. VFR is an abbreviation for 3 words, visual flight rules. And this is a really big deal flying little airplanes as a private pilot because that's the only way you can fly. So you're going to write that down. Private pilots can only fly under visual flight rules because you don't have an instrument rating and you can't fly just staring at the instruments. You have to be able to see out the window and see where the ground is. You got to be able to see the terrain, and you got to be able to see the other airplanes. Okay, so there's this little trick here. How good does the weather have to be for me to fly VFR? And the trick is 3 152s. So out in the hangar, out there is the red and white Cessna 210 that's kind of big. It has 6 seats. It doesn't have a propeller on it. But the little tiny 2-seater we've looked at over by the main hangar door, that's a Cessna 152. There's a lot of 152s. He said, let's just call this 352. And so this 315 stands for you got to have 3 miles visibility. That is, if you're flying along and you look straight ahead, you have to be able to see at least 3 miles. And these last 3, the 152, is how far away you have to be from a cloud. You got to be 1,000 feet above clouds, you got to be 500 feet below clouds, and you got to stay 2,000 feet away from the sides. If you'd rather cross out the word horizontal and write inside because you don't want to have to spell horizontal on the test, that's okay with me. You got to be 2,000 feet away from the sides of clouds. Like I said a couple of minutes ago, so if an airplane pops out of the cloud because they're an IFR airplane, you're far enough away you can see them and avoid them before they hit you, or they can see you and avoid you before they hit you. That's why you have to stay out of not just out of the clouds, but you have to stay far enough away from them. Now, there are exceptions to this, and we're going to get to that in another week or 2. But most of the time, as a VFR private pilot, you can't go flying unless there's at least 3 miles visibility. You're 1,000 feet above all the clouds. You're 500 feet below all the clouds, and 2,000 feet away from the side of a cloud. So I'm telling you, I'm going to ask you this on the final exam. Because this is one of the top 50 things you need to know as a VFR private pilot. So IFR stands for Instrument Flight Rules. You notice the R in both of these 2 3-letter acronyms. I don't know if they're acronyms, three-letter abbreviations, are rules. These are actually the FAA rules, which are actually federal law, and IFR stands for Instrument Flight Rules. If you fly and it's less than 3 miles visibility, or you're less than 1,000 feet above a cloud, or less than 500 feet below a cloud, or you're less than 2,000 feet from the side of the cloud, then you need to have an instrument rating, and you need to file an IFR flight plan. So you can write that down. So, flight rules is anything less than the 3152. And you have to have an instrument rating, and you have to file an instrument flight plan. In fact, we're going to add a third one and say, and you have to talk to ATC all the time. And ATC stands for Air Traffic Control. So 3, you have to talk to ATC all the time. You got to have an instrument rating, you have to file an instrument flight plan, and number 3, you have to talk to ATC all the time whenever you're doing an instrument flying under IFR. So there's a whole lot more details, and we're not going to go into any of those details. After you get your private pilot certificate, then if you want to, you can go get an instrument rating, and then you can fly through the clouds. Brian, question? How much would it cost? Well, if you do it under Part 61, it's 40 hours of flying. If the airplane's $120 an hour times 40, and the instructor is $60 an hour plus some ground time, it's probably going to be about $5 or $8 grand, closer to 8, just to get your instrument rating. Huh? Well, with it you can fly through the clouds. Yeah, you can't fly through thunderstorms because you'll die, but you can fly through clouds that won't kill you. Question?
Does it require any special equipment?
Does it require any special equipment? Yes, there's certain radios you have to have on board the airplane, and it's a different set of charts. It's a different set of charts. The kind of maps you fly around with are different. They don't show the ground very much. They just say fly from this radio transmitter to that radio transmitter and stay this high, and then you won't hit anything. Is there another question over here?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Once you get your private pilot certificate in the United States, there's no such thing as a private license. There are driver's licenses for cars, but the FAA only has certificates. Although you've probably seen all over the internet the PPL, and they're trying to say private pilot license, and I'm not telling you that you're wrong, it's just that you're not correct. Yeah, it really ought to be PPC, private pilot. What do you have to do to get your airline transport pilot certificate? Was that your question? To get your CFI. So you get the pilot certificate, and then you get your instrument rating on top of it, and then you get your commercial certificate. Now, you can get your commercial certificate before your instrument, but you got to get so many hours to get towards your commercial. Almost everybody gets their instrument along the way. So as soon as you have your commercial and your instrument, now you can earn your CFI. And if you don't go to an FAA-approved school, then the minimum to get a private is 40 hours. But the national average is 70. And the minimum number of flying to get an instrument rating is 40 hours. There's a kicker. It says if you want to get an instrument rating, you have to have 50 hours as pilot in command on cross-country flying. So while you're getting your private certificate, you're going to do 5 hours of solo time cross-country. You're going to go do cross-country, like you're going to take off out of Reedley and fly to Bakersfield and fly back, and your instructor will be teaching you along the way, and if they think you can handle it, they'll sign you off to go do it by yourself, and then they'll sign you off to go fly to Stockton. You get 4 hours of this cross-country flying time, and cross-country is when you have it at least 50 nautical miles away from each other. Like in Fresno County, I'd have to fly to Coalinga. Mendota's only 46 miles away. Crow flies, not as your sister drives. All right, so that means, so if I have 5 hours when I get my private, when I have 5 time on a cross country, I still get 45 more hours just of cross country piloting command time. That means I have to be the person responsible. So that means I either have to solo or I have to have a private pilot certificate. So although you need 40 hours of instrument training, either during that or before that, you got to get 50 hours of piloting command cross-country time. So most people will get their private, and if they think they're going to grow up and be a commercial pilot, be a flight instructor, as soon as they get their private, they start doing cross countries and making sure that the airports are at least 2 airports on each flight is more than 50 nautical miles away. So that way you're knocking off that 50 hours. But you got to get 250 to be a commercial pilot. So there's plenty of time in there to do your 50 hours of cross-country pilot and command time, and there's plenty of time to do your 40 hours of instrument flight training. And if you do all your instrument flight training at once and you use a simulator, you'll probably be able to do it in 40 hours. If you don't do it all at once and you don't use a simulator, it'll probably take you 50, 60, or 70 hours to get your instrument rating, which isn't that bad, except if you're paying an instructor $60 for every hour you're in the airplane. It'd be cheaper if you did it as fast as possible. So I recommend simulator time, and I suggest you don't take a break. So once you get your instrument rating, now you're just flying till you're coming up on 250. And just like the private, you got to take a written test, and then you take the check ride. And the check ride, oral exam, and it also has a flying part. Same thing for the instrument rating. There's a written test, and there's an oral exam all associated with the flying test. And then with the commercial, there's another written test with an oral exam associated with the flying exam. Question? For the private, the instrument, and the commercial, the oral is usually between 2 and 3 hours. How many times each? Yeah, so you're going to go to your check ride, and you're going to have passed your written test within the last 24 calendar months. Your written test is good for 2 years. It's actually good for 24 calendar months. So if you took your written test today, in the middle of October, it's valid through October 24 months from now. So see what I mean? It's a hair over 24 months. But that's the way the FAA calls it, calendar months. Okay. And then, so now I got the written test passed. Now when I go up for my check ride, my flight instructor is not just going to make sure I can fly the airplane correctly. They're going to be verbally evaluating me and asking me questions to make sure my aeronautical knowledge in my head, I can spit it out of my mouth to my instructor. So when I take my check ride, I can spit it out of my mouth to the examiner. So what you tend to do is you buy cram courses online that have all that knowledge, and you review it a lot. There's also books you can buy that have practice oral exam questions. And come August of 2018, when I'm teaching private pilot ground school at Reedley College, that are going to be primarily people who are going to fly that very semester, I will have generated a list. I have a list. Let me rephrase that. There's about 1,000 questions, and if you have all the questions and you have all the answers and you know what they mean, and you practice it a lot, after a while it's not that big of a deal. But you got to practice it a lot. The good news is you go up for a check ride and you fail. If the examiner lets the check ride keep going, then at the end they write down what you got wrong, and when you come back you only have to redo the part you missed. Lots of people do it. Yeah, go ahead. You can take the check ride as many times as you can afford it. As many times as you can afford it. Because you got to go back and pay your instructor, because your instructor, they have to look at all the things the examiner said you did wrong, and they have to retrain you in everything, whether it's the aeronautical knowledge or whether it's flight maneuvers. They have to train you on everything, and then they have to sign a piece of paper saying, I trained you on everything you got wrong, and I think you're going to pass. And at some point, if you keep failing, your instructor's going to go, I'm not going to sign you off anymore because it makes me look bad. So I don't think you can do it. So then you go find another flight instructor and you say that the other flight instructor was no good. And they, sure, you're going to pay me $6 an hour? Yeah, I'll take you. Let's go. Question? There's no maximum number of failures you can have. Mistakes? Well, technically, you're not supposed to miss any. But in reality, the maneuvering, here's the way it really works. Technically, you're not supposed to miss anything. But examiners are actually decent people. They've been flying a long, long time, and they know that no human is perfect. So generally, during the oral exam, if you don't know it, 2 or 3 questions. I can't remember what that is, but I know where it is, and then they say, look it up for me and show me. They go, start around again. That was a bad one I wanted to do. It really depends. In particular, you can they can fail you. Always have to continually pay attention to what you're doing and expect to. Am I answering your question all right? If it sounds at the moment like there's no way to do it, then my apologies for making it sound that way. It can't be true. Lots of people with IQs of less than 100 earn their private pilot certificate and all the way through their CFI. But they persevere, they're motivated, and they're dedicated. And they study till their butt falls off. Question? Do they ask you what? No. I'm sorry. They don't ask you 1,000 questions. But if I took all the private pilot aeronautical knowledge, I could write it all out and say, here's 1,000 questions. And if you answer to all these questions and you knew what it meant, you just didn't memorize it, then you would be able to pass the oral exam. No, they don't ask you 1,000 questions. They're going to say, we're going to fly from Fresno to Stockton. I want you to plan that flight. And so you're going to get out your calculator and do all that stuff. You're going to check the weather, and then they're going to ask you questions about it. They're going to say, what altitude did you take? How fast are we going to go? What's the weather like in Stockton? They're going to interrogate you about your plan. Yeah, that's correct. And they could say, well, what if the weather's only 2.5 miles visibility in Stockton? Can we still go? And you're going to say, no, we can't go to Stockton today because it's only 2.5 miles visibility. And then they might ask you, well, are we just going to cancel the flight? And you can say, yes, we're going to cancel, or you can say, no, I want to fly to Modesto instead. And then we'll land and we'll wait till the weather gets better in Stockton. And I got a credit card, and I'll buy you a hotel room, and I'll buy you dinner. I mean, just kidding. You don't say that part. There are a couple of ways, and I'm not going to. There is one way VFR pilots can go flying in less weather than that, but that's the another exception, which I'm not going to get into. So mostly, yeah, they ask you questions about that, about this flight that you're planning. They're not going to ask you more than 100 questions, but they would ask you an open-end question. They could say, why did you fly this way to get to Stockton? You need to be able to say, well, here's a radio navigation transmitter, and here's another radio navigation transmitter. I'm going to take off and fly to that navigation transmitter and fly to the next transmission navigation station, and then I'm going to fly from that one straight to Stockton. Oh, okay. Well, what's the tower frequency that you have to talk to when you get to Stockton? And you flip it open and say, well, it's this one right here. Okay. And then say, how far out from the airport do you need to call Stockton? Well, at least 10 miles, but I usually call them at 15. Okay. Is there anything you have to do before you call the tower? Yes, I'm gonna crank in a frequency called ATIS, Automatic Terminal Information Service, and it's a recorded message on what the weather is at Stockton Airport. And it's going to tell me what the altimeter setting is, so I'm going to set the altimeter. And then they're going to go, oh, how often do we have to set our altimeter between here and Stockton? And you're going to say, I must keep the altimeter set to a station within 100 miles of the airport during the entire flight. So you say, I'm going to have it set to Fresno when I take off, and before I get to Stockton, I'll set it to Stockton, so I'll never be more than 100 miles away from where I have my altimeter set. So they're going to ask it around this flight that you're going to pretend to make. And when you go on the flight, you're going to take off as if you're going to fly to Stockton. And you'll be flying to Stockton, and you'll be about 10 minutes out of the airport, and they'll say, where are you? Well, I'm about 10 minutes out of Fresno. We'll go to the map. And your clock, I've been going 70 knots, how many miles I am, and navigation instruments, and that confirms. Here's Madeira. That means I'm right here. Okay. Stop. Little flight computer. Because you wrote down what time you took off, and your route is going to take you an hour and 15 minutes. You just said add an hour and 15 minutes. Well, I'm going to get to Stockton, or when are you going to get to this next city? Or then they'd say, well, what if the engine went out right now? I say, well, Madeira Airport's right there. I'd land at Madeira Airport. And he might say, okay, let's simulate an engine failure. Go ahead and simulate an engine failure. And now you're going to do exactly what you did with your instructor. You're going to pull out the carburetor heat. You're going to pull the throttle to idle. You're going to trim it for best glide for 70 knots. You're going to change the fuel tanks. You're going to wiggle the ignition switch. You're going to move the mixture control. You're going to move the throttle. You're going to do all those things that you did with your instructor. Just somebody else is going to ask you to do it. You're going to turn towards the airport, pretending that the engine is out. You're going to say, well, right now, I was just talking to Fresno Air Traffic Control. I'm just going to call them, but I could call 121.5 because that's the emergency frequency. If you might, the examiner could say, go ahead and land. Don't yet. Now, the engine's at idle. You didn't turn it off. But yeah, they could say, well, can we make it? They'd say, do you think we'll be able to make it to Madeira? And if you say yes, they might say, well, let's do it. That's what happened on my check ride. It was a little gravel strip. Did I not tell you all that story? Okay. It's 14, we'll say 15, 20, 26 after in the computer lab. 26 on a real clock. 26 after.